For 30 years, I was the family's quiet disappointment, the invisible woman tapping on worthless keyboards while they paraded their millions. They loved their pitying smiles. But when the Pentagon's most powerful colonel walked past their lavish engagement party, ignored the groom's desperate groveling, and bowed deeply before me, the crystal glasses stopped clinking. In one breath, they realized the pathetic shadow in the corner held the absolute power to vaporize their entire fortune. Hello, wonderful listeners of Helena Revenge Stories. I want to start by thanking you for your continuous support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the funds to keep operating. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description and pinned comment of this video. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. My name is Violet Roberts, and I am 34 years old. The air inside the Aspen, Colorado estate was suffocatingly warm, thick with the overwhelming scent of expensive cedarwood and the cloying perfume of old money. Outside, the brutal winter winds howled against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, burying the mountains in heavy white snow. But inside this mansion, which my parents had proudly declared was worth tens of millions of dollars, everything was artificially perfect. They had rented this architectural marvel for one single purpose. It was the grand engagement party for my younger sister, Savannah, the undisputed golden angel of the Roberts bloodline, and her fiancé, Trent, an arrogant man constantly hailed as a rising star in the Silicon Valley tech scene. The vast living room was a nauseating theatrical display of hollow luxury. Servants carrying silver trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne weaved seamlessly through the crowd. My aunts, uncles, and cousins stood around the blazing stone fireplace, their faces illuminated by the firelight and their own smug satisfaction. They clustered around Trent, like loyal subjects worshipping a new king. I sat alone in a dimly lit corner of the room, wearing a simple, unbranded black dress. It was my armor against their endless scrutiny. From my quiet vantage point, I watched the sickening spectacle unfold. Trent was holding court, his chest puffed out under his impeccably tailored tuxedo, while my relatives practically tripped over themselves to stroke his fragile ego. The topic of the hour was his upcoming bid for a massive government security contract. "Trent, darling, you simply must tell us more about the Federal Cybersecurity Initiative," Aunt Clara cooed, her diamond bracelets clinking as she waved a manicured hand. "It is truly astonishing how you manage all those complicated defense algorithms. Savannah is so incredibly lucky to have found a man with such a brilliant mind." "It is a multi-million-dollar endeavor, Clara," Trent boasted loudly, making sure his voice carried across the room. He took a slow, theatrical sip of his champagne. "Securing the digital borders of the nation requires a visionary touch. The government infrastructure is outdated, and my company is stepping in to provide an impenetrable fortress. We are talking about contracts that will secure our legacy for decades." A chorus of impressed murmurs erupted from the family. Then, right on cue, the collective gaze of the room shifted. Their eyes bypassed the opulent decorations and locked onto the shadows where I sat perfectly still. The atmosphere shifted from fawning admiration to heavy, suffocating pity. They loved this part of the evening. They needed to remind themselves of their own superiority. "And how are things down in the trenches, Violet?" Uncle Richard called out. His tone was laced with a patronizing sweetness that made my stomach twist. "Still clicking away at that little desk job of yours? It must be terribly tedious, just staring at a screen and organizing files for 8 hours a day." I met his mocking gaze with absolute deadpan neutrality. "It pays the bills, Uncle Richard. The work gets done." I refused to give them the defensive reaction they were all eagerly waiting for. Savannah let out a high-pitched, tinkling laugh that always reminded me of cheap glass shattering on a tile floor. She leaned into Trent, resting her perfectly styled blonde head against his shoulder. "Oh, please do not be too hard on her. We cannot all be brilliant tech innovators or wealthy CEOs. Every company needs someone to do the boring paperwork and answer the phones, right, Violet? At least you are getting out of your apartment and making an honest living." The room erupted in polite, condescending chuckles. They fed on this dynamic. I was the designated failure of the family, the quiet disappointment they kept hidden in the background, so Savannah's glittering perfection could shine even brighter. I was the spinster sister, the cautionary tale of a woman who lacked ambition, a stark, gray contrast to the dazzling success story playing out in the center of the room. The self-congratulatory atmosphere reached a fever pitch just before 8 o'clock. The heavy oak double doors at the entrance swung open, and a sudden hush fell over the bustling crowd. The guest of honor had finally arrived. It was Colonel Vance Sterling. He was a man whose formidable reputation preceded him in every corridor of power. As a Pentagon titan, he held the ultimate authority to approve and veto national defense projects worth billions of dollars. He was the sole reason Trent had pushed my parents to spare no expense for this extravagant Aspen getaway. Securing Colonel Sterling's favor tonight meant securing the federal contract that would catapult Trent's startup into the highest echelons of global tech empires. Trent practically vibrated with desperate excitement. He shoved his way through the tight circle of relatives, his hand extended eagerly, a sycophantic smile plastered across his handsome face. He practically jogged toward the entrance. "Colonel Sterling," Trent announced, his voice booming awkwardly in the sudden, reverent quiet. "It is an absolute honor to welcome you. I am Trent, the Chief Executive Officer of—" Colonel Sterling did not even break his imposing military stride. He did not blink. He did not acknowledge the enthusiastically outstretched hand, nor did he offer a polite nod to the eager introduction. He simply kept walking, moving past Trent as if the tech CEO were nothing more than a minor gust of wind, a completely invisible entity. A collective, audible gasp rippled through my family. Trent froze, his hands still suspended in midair, his confident smile instantly morphing into an expression of utter bewilderment. Colonel Sterling's sharp, calculating gray eyes swept over the crystal chandeliers, the lavish food displays, and the stunned faces of my relatives. Then, his gaze locked directly onto the dark corner of the room. The rigid, disciplined posture of the older man seemed to snap into an even sharper focus. Without a moment of hesitation, he marched straight toward the shadows where I was sitting. The crowd of wealthy socialites parted for him in stunned, breathless silence. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my chair. The exceptionally powerful military commander, the man my family had just spent a small fortune to impress, stood at strict attention. His polished leather shoes clicked sharply together on the pristine hardwood floor. He squared his broad shoulders and bowed his head with absolute, unquestionable reverence. "Director Roberts," Colonel Sterling's voice boomed, clear and steady, echoing with immense respect through the cavernous living room. "I did not expect you to personally attend this inspection." The expensive crystal glasses stopped clinking. The patronizing smiles instantly froze. A suffocating, dead silence wrapped around the grand room of the Aspen estate, shattering their perfect illusion of superiority into a million irreparable pieces. I took a slow, measured breath before standing up. The dark fabric of my dress brushed against the chair, a subtle sound that felt entirely deafening in the absolute vacuum of the room. I did not rush. I smoothed the non-existent wrinkles from my skirt and met the commanding officer's eyes with a steady, unbreakable gaze. "At ease, Colonel," I replied, my voice stripped of any familial submissiveness or hesitation. It was the precise, commanding tone I reserved for high-stakes boardrooms in Geneva and secure underground bunkers in Washington. A field assessment is sometimes necessary when dealing with highly vulnerable assets. The physical perimeter of this location is secure, but the internal variables required a much closer, personal look. Colonel Sterling relaxed his rigid posture just a fraction. though he maintained his strict professional demeanor. Understood, Director. The Joint Chiefs of Staff were completely unaware that the strategic director of Vanguard Apex Alliance was personally overseeing this particular sector. We all assumed your rigorous schedule with the new Global Satellite Defense Initiative would keep you stationed in Europe for another 3 months. Frankly, knowing that Vanguard is running the ultimate sweep on these private contractors gives the Defense Department profound relief. Your agency operates on a clearance level the rest of us can only aspire to. Vanguard Apex Alliance. The name hung heavily in the suffocating, cedar-scented air of the Aspen Mansion. It was not a household tech startup or a standard corporate firm. It was a ghost organization, a sovereign intelligence and private security syndicate that operated entirely in the shadows. We dictated the security parameters for national defense agencies around the globe. We stood far above the standard jurisdictions of regular government bodies. We did not submit bids on federal contracts. The government begged us to validate and authorize theirs. The sheer weight of that revelation crashed into the lavish living room like a physical, devastating shockwave. My mother abruptly dropped her crystal champagne flute. The fragile glass shattered violently against the pristine hardwood floor, sending an expensive splash of sparkling wine across the toes of her designer heels. Nobody moved to clean it up. The servants had practically turned to stone. Uncle Richard's mouth hung wide open, his face rapidly draining of its previous flushed, wine-soaked arrogance. The entire family dynamic, carefully constructed and reinforced over 3 decades of systematic bullying, fractured and collapsed in the span of 30 seconds. Then came the desperate, agonizing scramble to rebuild their shattered reality. Aunt Clara was the very first to recover her voice, though it trembled with a sickly, transparent desperation. She pushed her way to the front of the stunned crowd, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking erratically against each other. "Violet, darling," she shrieked, letting out a high-pitched sound of forced delight that grated against my ears. "Vanguard what? A director? Oh my goodness! Why on earth did you not tell us you were running a global security empire? We have been so worried about your little data entry job all these years." "Yes, exactly," my mother chimed in, her shaking hands fluttering nervously around her thick pearl necklace. She forced a rigid, terrified smile onto her face. "We are simply astonished. A director. Oh, the things you must see and do. We always knew you had a brilliant mind, sweetie. We were always your biggest supporters." The chorus of eager, sycophantic voices began to swell around me. The very same people who had sneered at my plain black dress less than 10 minutes earlier were suddenly treating it like a royal robe of unmatched elegance. They crowded around, aggressively offering fresh drinks, asking a barrage of invasive, overly friendly questions about my top-secret security clearance and my international travels. The thick, cloying layer of hypocrisy was physically revolting. But I was not looking at them. My cold gaze cut straight through the desperate, fawning crowd and locked dead onto Trent. The self-proclaimed golden boy of Silicon Valley looked as though the solid floor had just vanished entirely beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. All the vibrant color had drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale gray hue. He was staring at me with eyes wide with unadulterated, primal terror. In his specific industry, my agency was the ultimate Grim Reaper. We were the invisible, omnipotent hand that either authorized, audited, or completely obliterated tech companies trying to siphon off federal defense budgets. A heavy bead of cold sweat rolled slowly down Trent's temple, catching the bright light of the crystal chandeliers above. His hands, previously clutching his champagne glass with such triumphant arrogance, were now visibly shaking uncontrollably. The liquid inside sloshed over the rim. He realized in agonizing real time that the multi-million-dollar contract he had been loudly parading around all night, the literal, desperate lifeline for his failing, over-leveraged company, rested entirely in the palm of the woman he had just publicly humiliated. He tried to swallow, but his throat bobbed uselessly. He looked exactly like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, watching me rest my hand firmly on the lever. "Violet, please," my father insisted loudly, stepping forward and aggressively waving away a terrified waiter. "You cannot sit back here in the dark anymore. Come to the center of the room. We are clearing the head of the main dining table for you right now. Savannah and Trent can move down. We need to celebrate our most successful daughter properly." I did not smile. I did not show a single ounce of the vindicated joy or proud triumph they were so desperately searching for. I just looked at them, my expression as cold, analytical, and unforgiving as the brutal blizzard raging outside the glass walls. "I am perfectly fine where I am," I stated flatly, my voice slicing through their chaotic fawning like a freezing surgical blade. "But you kept this a massive secret," Savannah cried out, her voice a messy mixture of genuine shock and an ugly rising panic. "For over 10 years, you let us think you were an absolute nobody." I tilted my head, looking slowly at my sister, then at Trent, and finally at the vast sea of pale, anxious faces surrounding them. "I never kept it a secret," I replied softly, the chilling, absolute calmness in my tone sending a visible, violent shudder through my mother's shoulders. "I did not hide a single thing about my life. You simply never bothered to ask me a decent question." Without waiting for a response, I sat back down in my chair, resting my hands comfortably on my lap. The grand head of the lavishly decorated main table stood completely empty across the room, a glaring, pathetic monument to their sudden desperation. I waved my hand in a slow, dismissive gesture toward the party. "Please continue your engagement celebration," I commanded softly. "Do not mind the shadow in the corner. I am just here to observe the show." And so they stood there, paralyzed by profound fear and confusion, trapped in their own luxurious cage, while I watched them squirm exactly like the pathetic, transparent puppets they truly were. The suffocating tension inside the living room lingered for exactly 15 minutes before my sister finally broke. The party had attempted to resume a frantic, unnatural rhythm, with the string quartet playing louder to drown out the anxious whispers, but the damage was irreversible. I remained in my chair, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when Savannah suddenly materialized beside me. Her movements were jerky, completely devoid of the graceful, practiced elegance she usually paraded. She leaned down, her manicured fingers gripping the armrest of my chair with white-knuckled desperation. "Violet, I need some fresh air. The heating in here is unbearable. Come with me to the terrace. Right now," Savannah commanded. But it was not a command. Her voice, usually so melodic and dripping with arrogant confidence, was thin and trembling violently. I studied her pale face for a fraction of a second before nodding slowly. I stood up and followed her through the heavy glass doors leading out to the expansive stone balcony. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind us, sealing away the classical music and the prying eyes of our relatives, the freezing mountain wind of Aspen hit us like a physical blow. The temperature was well below freezing, easily hovering around 0 degrees, but Savannah did not seem to feel the biting cold. She walked to the edge of the stone railing, her back to me, her thin silk dress whipping frantically in the wind. Then, the golden angel of the Roberts family collapsed. She did not just cry, she shattered. A raw, ugly, and entirely unpracticed sob tore out of her throat. She sank to her knees against the frosted stone floor, wrapping her arms around her own chest as if she were trying to hold her ribcage together. The perfectly styled blonde curls clung to her wet cheeks, and the expensive waterproof mascara began to streak violently down her face, staining her flawless complexion with dark, jagged lines. I stood a few feet away, watching this monumental breakdown in complete silence. This was the psychological twist I had never anticipated. I had spent 34 years believing Savannah lived a life of absolute, unblemished perfection. I had thought she was the spoiled, untouchable princess, sitting high on a throne built from our parents' endless adoration. But as I looked at her now, shivering and broken on the freezing patio, I saw something else entirely. I saw a hostage. "Savannah, get up from the freezing floor," I instructed, my voice calm and even. I stepped forward and offered my hand. She ignored my hand and looked up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, hunted terror. "You cannot destroy him, Violet. I saw the way you looked at him in there. I know what you are capable of now. I know what Vanguard does to tech companies that fail their audits. But you have to push his government contract through. You have to approve it. I am begging you on my hands and knees." I crossed my arms over my dark coat, shielding myself from the freezing wind. "Trent humiliated you and your family for his own amusement all evening. He paraded you around like a shiny new hood ornament for his corporate vehicle. Why on earth are you defending a man who looks at you with absolutely zero respect?" Savannah let out a bitter, hysterical laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Respect? Violet, there is no respect. There is no love. The entire perfect life they think I have is a complete lie. Trent is a monster. He is a parasite." She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking so violently she could barely brush the snow from her ruined silk dress. The truth began to spill out of her in a frantic, unstoppable torrent. "He has controlled every single aspect of my life for the past 2 years. He tracks my phone 24 hours a day. He dictates who I speak to, what I wear, and where I go. If I disobey him, the punishments behind closed doors are psychological torture. He strips away my sanity until I am forced to beg for his forgiveness for things I never even did." I felt a cold, sharp knot tighten in my stomach. The chilling reality of her situation was far darker than simple arrogance. "If he is abusing you, then leave him. You have the family's money. You have our parents backing you." "The money is gone, Violet!" Savannah screamed, the sound tearing through the howling wind. "That is the horrible truth. The money is entirely gone." She grabbed my forearms, her nails digging painfully into my skin through my heavy coat. "Our parents are practically bankrupt. Trent manipulated them. He convinced Dad to mortgage this entire family estate and drain their retirement accounts to secretly fund his failing company. He took $4 million from them over the last 18 months. He told them it was a guaranteed investment for their future son-in-law. If Trent does not secure this massive defense contract from the Pentagon, his startup will instantly collapse. He will default on all the loans." The magnitude of the deception hit me. The grand Aspen mansion, the expensive caviar, the vintage champagne inside. It was all a frantic, desperate illusion. The family was drowning in massive debt, desperately dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, pretending they were still sailing in luxury. "And if he fails?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "If he fails, he promised he would drag all of us straight to hell with him," Savannah choked out, fresh tears freezing on her cheeks. "He has fabricated digital evidence against me. He claims he will release a massive, career-destroying scandal to the press, framing me for corporate embezzlement. He told me he would ensure our parents lose every single penny and face federal fraud charges for the money they moved around for him. He holds all the cards, Violet. He owns us. You have to save him so he can pay the money back. If you approve his security clearance, he will get the Pentagon funds, and I will finally be allowed to quietly divorce him next year without destroying the family. Please." I pulled my arms gently from her frantic grip and stepped back. The bitter wind howled around us, but my mind was utterly silent, processing the horrifying calculus of the situation. For 3 decades, I had quietly resented my parents and my sister. I had believed they worshipped wealth and status so much that they willingly pushed me into the shadows. But the reality was far more tragic and pathetic. Their toxic obsession with appearances, their desperate need to maintain a glittering social facade, had made them the perfect victims. They had willingly opened their front doors and sacrificed their beloved golden child to a cold-blooded, manipulative predator simply because that predator wore an expensive suit and promised them a prestigious Silicon Valley title. I was not the victim of this family. I was the only one who had survived them. My isolation had been my absolute protection. Because they had deemed me a worthless failure, Trent had never bothered to look in my direction. He had targeted the brightest, most vulnerable point of their pride. A profound, terrifying clarity washed over me. The resentment I had carried for 30 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and lethal focus. I did not want to destroy my family anymore. They were already broken, trapped in a pathetic prison of their own making. My vengeance was no longer about proving my worth to them. It was about tearing down the poisonous ideology that had allowed a monster like Trent to infiltrate their lives and destroy my sister. I was going to obliterate the parasite. "Violet, please," Savannah whispered, her voice breaking. "Will you approve the Vanguard contract? Will you save us?" I looked at my younger sister. I looked at the dark bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, hidden beneath thick layers of expensive concealer. I reached out and gently tucked a stray, wet blonde curl behind her freezing ear. "You do not need to worry about the contract anymore, Savannah," I said softly, my voice carrying a strange maternal warmth that I had never used with her before. "I am going to handle Trent. I promise you, by the end of this night, the financial debts, the blackmail, and his entire existence will be completely resolved." Savannah let out a long, shuddering breath of relief, her shoulders slumping. "Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you, Violet." She threw her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder, sobbing quiet tears of gratitude. She believed I was going to rubber stamp the approval and give Trent the millions he wanted. She did not look up in time to see the expression on my face. She could not see the dangerous, lethal calculation blazing in my eyes, cold and sharp as a sniper's crosshairs. I was going to resolve the issue, exactly as I promised, but I was not going to give Trent a government contract. I was going to give him a public execution. When I stepped back into the suffocating warmth of the grand living room, the string quartet was desperately attempting to fill the heavy silence with a lively classical piece. Savannah had retreated to a powder room to scrub the ruined mascara from her face and reapply her flawless, unbothered mask. I walked straight to the leather sofa near the roaring stone fireplace and sat down, carefully arranging my expression into one of reluctant submission. Trent noticed my return immediately. He had spent the last 20 minutes pacing near the mahogany bar, downing 3 consecutive glasses of aged bourbon. When he saw me sitting quietly, lacking the cold, aggressive posture from earlier, his inflated ego rapidly reinflated. The sheer, blinding arrogance of the man completely overrode whatever primal fear Colonel Sterling had instilled in him earlier that evening. He truly believed that my private conversation with Savannah meant I had folded under the crushing weight of family loyalty. He swaggered over to me, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He leaned casually against the stone mantelpiece, looking down at me with a sickeningly triumphant smile. "I see Savannah had a little chat with you outside," Trent said smoothly, his voice pitched low so the rest of the room could not hear. "Family is absolutely everything, Violet. I knew you would eventually calm down and see the bigger picture. We all have to protect each other, right?" I gave him a short, slow nod, letting my shoulders slump just a fraction. "I have decided to personally review your bid for the defense contract. I will look at the architecture of your security system." Trent let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Review it? Violet, you are going to fast-track it. I expect full, unrestricted authorization by 8 o'clock Monday morning. My system is an absolute masterpiece. We call it the Aegis Protocol. It utilizes dynamic quantum encryption. It is completely impenetrable. The Pentagon desperately needs it, and frankly, your parents need the financial return on their generous investment." He was practically gloating, entirely unaware that he was casually confessing to severe financial coercion. He leaned closer, the overwhelming scent of bourbon and expensive cologne washing over me. It has a 100% success rate against external breaches, Trent bragged, his eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. You will rubber stamp the approval, the funds will be wired into my accounts, and we can all go back to being one big, happy, wealthy family. Impenetrable, I repeated softly, keeping my face perfectly blank. That is a very bold claim for a Silicon Valley startup. It is an undeniable fact, he countered sharply, patting the lapel of his tuxedo. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a victory speech to prepare for our guests. As Trent turned his back to me and began arrogantly signaling the waitstaff to pour a fresh round of vintage champagne for the room, I slipped my right hand into the deep pocket of my dark coat. I pulled out a device that looked exactly like a standard commercial smartphone, but the sleek casing held a heavily modified, military-grade encrypted communicator directly linked to the Vanguard Apex Alliance subterranean servers. While my family eagerly gathered around the center of the room, whispering excitedly to one another about my apparent surrender, I initiated a secure tactical link with my lead cyber operative stationed in our Virginia command center. My thumbs flew flawlessly across the digital keyboard. Initiate a Level 5 penetration protocol on the core servers of Trent's corporation. Target the system he calls the Aegis Protocol. Bypass all standard commercial firewalls and tear down the back-end architecture. I want full root access to his private financial ledgers and any hidden subdirectories. Report back immediately. Copy that, Director. Initiating deep dive now. The encrypted text flashed instantly on my dark screen. I rested the device comfortably on my lap, masking it with my black clutch, and calmly watched Trent playing the conquering hero. He was laughing loudly at a terrible joke my Uncle Richard had just made, acting as though the temporary, terrifying panic from an hour ago had simply been a minor, amusing misunderstanding. It took exactly 9 minutes and 42 seconds for my encrypted phone to vibrate. Trent's allegedly impenetrable fortress had fallen faster than a cheap, rusty padlock. But the massive data packet my operative sent back did not just contain evidence of routine corporate embezzlement, or the millions of dollars he had stolen from my aging parents. The glowing text on my secure screen revealed a digital conspiracy so deeply toxic that it instantly elevated the situation from a domestic fraud case to a matter of extreme national security. Director, the secure message read, we are inside the core. The financial ledgers confirm massive corporate insolvency and multi-million-dollar investor fraud. But we found a secondary, heavily encrypted server partitioned deep beneath the main architecture. It is a massive data funnel. His company has been secretly harvesting the biometric profiles of millions of American citizens who use his commercial software. Fingerprints, facial recognition nodes, retinal scans, and localized behavioral algorithms. My blood ran completely cold. I kept my face utterly impassive as I read the next horrifying line. He is not storing the data for internal use. He is actively auctioning it on the dark web. The encrypted transaction logs show massive offshore wire transfers from international criminal syndicates and hostile foreign intelligence agencies. He is selling the biological identities of the American public to the highest foreign bidder. Trent was not just a manipulative narcissist abusing my sister and draining my parents' retirement accounts. He was a high-level traitor. He was actively committing severe, calculated acts of treason, and he had fully intended to use the upcoming Pentagon contract to install his spyware directly into the military's secure servers. He was planning to hand the nation's defense grid directly over to our absolute worst enemies, all while smiling and drinking our champagne. I locked the screen of my device and slipped it smoothly back into my pocket. My cold gaze shifted across the crowded, noisy room and met the steely, waiting eyes of Colonel Sterling, who was standing quietly near the base of the grand staircase. He had been watching me intently, waiting for my final assessment. I gave him a single, barely perceptible nod, followed by 2 deliberate taps of my index finger against the arm of my leather chair. It was our agency's silent tactical code for a severe, immediate threat. Code Black. Treason confirmed. Require immediate tactical extraction and detainment. Colonel Sterling's jaw tightened. He did not say a single word. He simply turned on his polished heel and stepped smoothly into the shadowed hallway, leading toward the massive front doors. He pulled his own secure communication device to his ear, his voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper. Outside the lavish, glowing windows of the Aspen estate, the brutal winter blizzard continued to rage, the howling wind perfectly masking the sound of heavily armored tactical vehicles rolling silently up the private mountain road. While my aunts and uncles clinked their expensive crystal glasses, 50 heavily armed federal agents, backed by the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Vanguard's own elite tactical strike teams, were rapidly establishing a lethal, inescapable perimeter around the multi-million-dollar property. Snipers dressed in white winter camouflage were taking positions in the freezing snow, training their red laser sights on the mansion's exits. The steel trap was permanently locked. Back in the suffocating warmth of the living room, Savannah finally returned, her face a perfect tragic mask of forced happiness. She walked slowly to Trent's side, and he immediately threw a heavy, aggressively possessive arm around her fragile shoulders, pulling her entirely too close to his chest. "Attention, everyone! May I have your attention, please?" Trent bellowed, his voice booming confidently over the soft classical music. He raised his freshly poured glass of champagne high into the air. The room instantly fell silent, every single relative turning toward him with wide, eagerly expectant smiles. "Tonight has been a night of incredible revelations and tremendous family unity," Trent began, his chest puffed out, radiating pure, unadulterated arrogance. He looked directly at me across the room, a smug, victorious sneer playing maliciously on his lips. "We have overcome some small misunderstandings, and we have proven that when we all work together, there is absolutely no limit to what we can achieve. The future of my brilliant company is secured, and the future of this glorious family has never been brighter." He paused, letting the eager, greedy anticipation build in the room. Ready to unleash the ultimate crescendo of his conqueror's monologue, he sucked in a theatrical breath. Yet, his voice belonged to a ghost. Standing happily atop a lethal drop, he was cheerfully looping a thick snare around his own windpipe. He noticed absolutely nothing of the shrouded headsman veiled in the gloom, whose hand rested on the release switch, just waiting for the prime instant to strike. "I would like to invite Director Roberts to stand," Trent announced loudly, gesturing toward me with his half-empty champagne flute. "Violet, please, stand up and confirm this monumental collaboration in front of our beloved family. Tell them about the incredible future we are building together." I remained seated for a brief, agonizing moment. The silence in the room stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. Every single pair of eyes in the lavish room was glued to me, waiting with bated breath for the quiet, unremarkable sister to finally bow her head and validate the golden boy. Then, I stood. I did not pick up a glass to join his toast. I walked deliberately toward the center of the room, moving with a cold, predatory grace, and stopped directly in front of the massive, polished marble coffee table that sat between the opulent sofas. From the shadowed hallway near the entrance, Colonel Sterling reappeared. He walked with heavy, purposeful strides, his military boots echoing sharply on the hardwood. He carried a thick, heavily sealed manila folder. He bypassed Trent entirely, treating the arrogant executive like empty space, and handed the heavy document directly to me with a sharp, respectful nod. I raised the folder so everyone could clearly see the bold crimson lettering stamped aggressively across the front cover. Top secret. With a sharp flick of my wrist, I slammed the heavy dossier onto the marble table. The explosive smack echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room, making several of my aunts flinch violently. "There will be no collaboration," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute, freezing authority. "There is no contract. There is only an execution." Trent's smug smile faltered, replaced by a twitch of genuine confusion and rising panic. "Violet, what kind of joke is this?" "I do not make jokes," I replied coldly, locking my eyes with his. "I execute audits, and your audit is officially complete. Let us start with the domestic fraud. Over the past 18 months, you have systematically drained $4 million from my parents' retirement accounts. You manipulated them into mortgaging this very estate, promising them a massive return on investment to fund a company that has been entirely insolvent for over a year." My father staggered backward as if he had been physically struck, his face turning an ashen, sickly white. My mother let out a strangled, breathless gasp, her shaking hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. "That is an absolute lie," Trent shouted, his voice cracking, his composure rapidly disintegrating. "I am building a legacy." "You are building a house of cards on the backs of gullible victims," I cut him off sharply, stepping closer to the table. "And when the stolen money ran out, you resorted to psychological terrorism. You have spent the last 2 years systematically isolating, abusing, and blackmailing my sister. You fabricated digital evidence to hold over her head, threatening to destroy her reputation and send our parents to federal prison if she dared to leave you." The entire room turned in horror to look at Savannah. She was trembling uncontrollably, but she stepped away from Trent, putting several feet of distance between them. She looked at our terrified parents and gave a single devastating nod. The golden illusion of her perfect relationship shattered into dust right before their eyes. "You bitch!" Trent hissed, the handsome veneer completely melting away to reveal the feral, cornered animal underneath. He took a threatening, aggressive step toward me. "You cannot prove anything. You are just a jealous, bitter spinster trying to ruin my life because you have absolutely nothing." "I have everything," I corrected him smoothly, my tone dropping to a lethal, whisper-quiet register that demanded absolute silence. "Because financial fraud and domestic abuse are just the warm-up acts. My cyber operatives just breached the core architecture of your impenetrable security system. We found the hidden subdirectories. We found the offshore wire transfers from international criminal syndicates and hostile foreign intelligence agencies." Trent froze entirely. The air seemed to physically leave his lungs. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a polished corpse. "You are not selling cybersecurity," I continued, projecting my voice so every single relative could hear the horrifying truth. "You are actively harvesting the biometric data of millions of American citizens, fingerprints, retinal scans, facial recognition algorithms. You are packaging the biological identities of the American public and auctioning them on the dark web to the highest foreign bidder. You are not a tech innovator, Trent. You are a traitor to the United States of America." The word traitor hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The guests were paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare. The golden boy they had practically worshipped for hours was being publicly dissected and exposed as a monster of unimaginable proportions. Trent completely lost his mind. His eyes bulged with manic, unadulterated rage. He let out a primal, guttural scream and hurled his heavy crystal champagne flute directly at my head. I did not even flinch. The glass missed me by inches, shattering violently against the stone fireplace. He lunged across the marble table, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. He never even made it halfway. The massive front doors of the mansion did not just open. They were violently blown inward with a deafening crash that shook the very foundation of the house. The heavy oak splintered, and a flood of heavily armed federal agents clad in black tactical gear stormed into the grand living room like a tidal wave of righteous fury. "Federal agents, get down on the ground. Do it now," a voice roared over the absolute chaos. Red laser sights cut through the dusty air, painting Trent's chest, arms, and forehead in dozens of lethal crimson dots. Before he could even process the violent breach, 3 massive tactical operators tackled him mid-lunge. The sheer force of the impact drove Trent brutally into the hardwood floor. The sickening crunch of his nose breaking against the expensive wood echoed loudly over the terrified screams of my family. "Do not move a single muscle," an operative commanded, pressing a heavy combat boot firmly between Trent's shoulder blades while violently wrenching his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place sounded like a final, absolute judgment. Chaos erupted. My aunts were shrieking in absolute terror, huddling together near the bar. My mother had collapsed onto a sofa, weeping hysterically into her hands, entirely unable to process the total destruction of her perfect world. My father stood frozen, his jaw slack, watching the wealthy, powerful son-in-law he had banked his entire life savings on being restrained like a rabid dog. And in the absolute center of the storm, I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my dark coat. I was the failure, the shadow, the embarrassment. And yet, I was the sole commander of the room, looking down at the wreckage with absolute, unbothered detachment, directing the entire arrest without moving a single inch. Trent thrashed violently against the floor, his face smeared with his own blood, his expensive tuxedo torn and ruined. He craned his neck, glaring wildly at the terrified faces of my parents and relatives. His manic laughter bubbled up, sounding wet and completely unhinged. "Look at all of you!" Trent spat, his voice dripping with venomous contempt as he addressed the sobbing family. "You stupid, pathetic, greedy fools! You practically gift-wrapped Savannah and handed her to me just because I wore a nice watch and mentioned Silicon Valley. You are so desperate for status that you would sell your own souls to anyone who threw a few shiny coins in your direction." He coughed, spitting a mixture of blood and saliva onto the pristine floor. He locked his manic, hateful eyes onto my father. "You handed me your entire fortune without a single background check because you wanted to brag to your golf buddies. You despise your own daughter for wearing cheap clothes, yet she just outplayed all of us. You deserve to be bankrupt. You deserve absolutely nothing. Get him out of my sight," I ordered coldly. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute crushing authority in my tone cut through Trent's raving instantly. The tactical operators hauled Trent roughly to his feet. He continued to scream and thrash, cursing my family's vanity and arrogance, his voice echoing down the long hallway until they dragged him brutally out the shattered front door and threw him into the back of a waiting armored vehicle. The heavy, oppressive silence returned to the living room, broken only by the muffled, pathetic sounds of my family weeping over the shattered remains of their artificial empire. The heavy oak doors of the mansion remained completely shattered, letting the freezing wind howl through the grand living room. Trent was gone, swallowed by the brutal winter night. The suffocating silence that settled over the estate was no longer built on arrogant superiority. It was built on absolute, profound shame. My parents and relatives stood entirely frozen among the wreckage of their precious high society facade. Slowly, the paralysis broke. My mother took a trembling step forward, her face stained with ruined makeup and tears, her hands reaching out desperately toward me. My father followed closely behind, his shoulders hunched, his previous towering pride entirely extinguished. The rest of the family shuffled forward like a flock of terrified, lost sheep. "Violet," my mother sobbed, her voice cracking as she tried to grab my hands. "Oh, Violet, we are so incredibly sorry. We had absolutely no idea about the money or what he was doing to your sister. We were so completely blind. But please, you have to know, we have always been so incredibly proud of you. Deep down, we always knew you were destined for greatness." "Yes, of course," Uncle Richard chimed in eagerly, his voice shaking. "You saved us tonight, Violet. You are the true hero of this family." I did not smile. I did not accept my mother's reaching hands. Instead, I took one slow, deliberate step backward, putting a clear, insurmountable physical boundary between us. The desperate hope in their eyes instantly shattered against the cold, unyielding wall of my expression. "Stop," I commanded softly. The single word carried enough weight to freeze them exactly where they stood. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this is about love or a sudden realization of my worth. You are not apologizing because you suddenly regret 30 years of mistreating and ignoring me. You are apologizing because you are utterly terrified of the power I hold. You are not proud of me. You are just afraid of me. And you are desperate for me to fix the massive financial ruin you willingly walked into." I turned my back on their stunned, tear-streaked faces and walked over to Savannah. She was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, staring blankly at the floor, shivering in her ruined silk dress. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick, embossed card, placing it gently into her trembling hand. "This is the personal contact for the most ruthless, effective divorce attorney in the United States," I told her quietly. "She will handle the separation, and she will ensure you salvage whatever assets are left. But I am not going to hold your hand through this. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet, Savannah. You do not need anyone's slander, and you absolutely do not need their applause to exist." Savannah clutched the card tightly to her chest and gave a slow, tearful nod. I turned and picked up my dark winter coat from the chair. "I will not be staying the night," I announced to the silent room. Without waiting for another empty apology or a tearful goodbye, I walked out through the splintered doors and stepped straight into the freezing, liberating storm. A heavily armored black SUV was already idling in the circular driveway, its headlights cutting sharply through the dense snow. I climbed into the warm leather back seat, the heavy door slamming shut behind me, sealing away the toxic world of the Roberts family forever. As the driver put the vehicle into gear, my secure phone buzzed. A new encrypted message flashed across the screen, detailing an urgent national security directive awaiting my immediate authorization. A profound, weightless sense of relief washed over me. I looked out the tinted window and watched the glowing, artificial lights of the Aspen mansion slowly fade away in the rearview mirror until they were completely swallowed by the dark mountain road. I smiled, finally understanding the ultimate truth. The greatest revenge in the world is not forcing the people who broke you to finally acknowledge your worth. It is building a life so incredibly powerful that you simply no longer need their acknowledgement at all. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please let me know in the comments section. If you found today's story engaging and meaningful, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and pinned comment below. Your kindness allows us to pay our dedicated team, giving them the means to feed their families and helping us continue creating better stories to serve you. Thank you again, and take care.